I have often said that the hall was, it was pulsating, it was the centre of our lives. Anything happened, we'd say, let's go and tell Bhagavan, or go and ask Bhagavan, or, oh, Bhagavan would be interested in everything. For instance, even, which I've told this story before, but when my mother wanted the recipe for idli powder, she went and asked at the kitchen. They wrote it out, came and showed it to Bhagavan. Then they gave it to her. Everything. It was so much the hub, the centre of the ashram, the centre of, and as I've said, it was not a cathedral, it was his home. But when he went into meditation, sat there in samadhi, you could hear a pin drop. Nobody spoke. You couldn't, you know, Bhagavan was there. He sat there and the world became silent. Even the animals became silent. I think the animals recognized Bhagavan and gave him more respect than even some humans do today. Because they think of him as a wise man sitting there doling out spiritual advice. Well, he is, but he's so much more. I mean, he's a jnani. You don't... People make up things that they say he has said because it suits them. To do that is... it's ignorant, it's disrespectful, and it's dangerous. You don't do... I'll tell you a little thing that happened, because when Bhagavan's attention was drawn to something, it changed. He was a force of nature. And he would never say, ill wish somebody because they behaved badly. He was beyond all of that. But if his attention was drawn to it, when I was a little girl, I had a mop of hair, lot, curly, and it hurt when it was combed, so I didn't like it to be combed. And I remember I was going to the ashram, my mother said, go and have your hair combed. Today we would cut it. In those days, every girl had long hair. So I went there, and Bhagavan was talking to Lakshmi, the cow. They were having a little chat session, and I went there, and Bhagavan looked at me and he said, look at my hair. And I said, no, it doesn't matter, and I went off. Well, Bhagavan had noticed my hair. It didn't grow for 2 years. Now, he didn't ill will me, he didn't wish this on a little girl, but he noticed that's enough. And people who invent words and put them into his mouth to polish their own egos, do they know what they're doing? It's like taking a lightning strike in order to see a step in the dark. You know, you need a torch, you don't need lightning. And a jnani is not just a wise old gentleman sitting there doling out spiritual advice. You walk carefully. You don't mess about. But the animals, They knew. They, you know, in those days, the entrance door to the hall was now what is now a window opposite the couch. That was the door. And further, where there is a door that's never opened, that was a window. Anyway, most people came in through that door just opposite Bhagwan's couch. And the dogs would come in. They'd just walk in, do namaskaram like a person, and walk out again. They came to pay their respects. And you know, the strange thing is, nobody said, wow, gosh, we all accepted, we took it for granted that the dogs were coming to pay their respects. And the squirrels would come to the door, stop there, look around, run across the floor, up onto the couch, on his leg, onto his hand. And he had a little tin with puffed rice in it. And he'd put some on his hand and they would eat that. And then he'd say, okay. And I remember once he ticked off a squirrel, said, no, don't be greedy, you've had enough, leave some for the others. And this one ran off again. I was sitting there in the hall, and a peacock came in beside me, you know, as it was walking up. And you know, the way peacocks walked up to the couch, looked at Bhagavan, spread his tail, and danced. And we all watched, and Bhagavan watched him. And he did a beautiful dance, the way they do with all their feathers and so on. And when he'd finished, the peacock stopped with his tail up, looking at Bhagavan like this. And Bhagavan said, yes, very nice. And he put his tail down, turned round, and walked out. The monkeys would come and show him their babies. They'd come to the window. They didn't come into the hall much. But they knew who he was. It was a very special time.
And
Lakshmi. Yes, well, she was a special cow. She had a special relationship with Bhagavan. She loved him and she would come and rush to see him whenever she could. And he understood her. Actually, he understood all animals. He never made a big thing about it, but he understood them and they knew it and they understood him. And it was extraordinary, that continuous relationship. He had a wicked sense of humour sometimes. He would make a joke and everybody fell about laughing. The whole hall was full of laughter.
The girl with the knits in her hair.
It was actually so much the centre of our world. So much. Everything revolved around that. Nothing happened, but people went to check with him. Should we do it this way or that way, you know? And yeah, it was a very special time.
With her hair.
Yeah, there was a lady, not a girl, a lady. She had beautiful hair and she was very proud of it. And she came in once. She just washed her hair, so it was not done up and it was down to here, you know. Well, as you know, we don't walk around with our hair loose. Anyway, she sat down self-consciously and a monkey came and looked at her, jumped up and started going through her hair looking for Poochie. And Bhagavan thought that was so funny. Oh, I don't know. And she would say, oh, so-and-so has written. We must go and tell Bhagavan. Everything, he was so much part of our lives. And not that I don't appreciate now that people go and always in an attitude of prayer. That's correct. But it's not the full picture. Bhagavan was more than somebody who sat there at a distance and we all tiptoed in and did a bit of worshipping and tiptoed out again. No, he was involved in our lives. And for that we were so fortunate. When we first arrived, my mother was going to go walk round the hill with Vishwanathan. You must have, you knew him or heard of him or something. Well, he was a lovely man anyway. I wanted to go too, and I think I was 5 or 6 years old, and my mother said no. And we were living in McKeever's compound then. And I started to yell that I wanted to go, and I made such a noise that Bhagavan heard me in the ashram, and he sent somebody to find out why I was crying so much, why I was making such a noise. I don't know what the end of that was, but but we used to go round the hill a lot, my mother and I, and my father didn't very much because he was in a concentration camp during the war, and when he came out he couldn't walk any distance. But I'll tell this story, you can take it out. It's not directly Bhagavan. We were going round we stopped we called it Bhagavan's bridge. When he walked round the hill, there was one bridge where he always used to stop. And there we stopped, and my mother had some bananas. So we were standing there eating bananas, and a girl came, and she stood in front of us, carrying her child on her hip, looking like that. So I said to her, why are you staring? We're just people like you. And she looked at me as if I was mad. And she said, if you were like us, would I be staring? Isn't that perfect?
Isn't cute? So natural.
Yeah. I mean, you can't fault that. I felt a complete idiot, you know.
What about playing amongst the stonecutters in the Mother's Temple? They were forever chipping away.
No, we helped my brother, not my sister so much, but my brother and I helped to build that temple. Because after lunch, when everybody was having their rest, they were doing the plastering, you know, and all the gods and things. And there was thatch on top. So we used to climb up and go inside the thatch and add our fingerprints and thumbprints. They're up there still. Because we thought that I don't know what else we did. I think some of it was quite inventive. He never took sides between anybody and anybody. It's funny, you know, there were always strange people with faulty vision, I can only think, hanging around. People who made up stories, who, I don't know, whatever reason they must have, at least they came here. They were blessed to do that. And till today there are people who go around inventing stories, and very strange that. Well, I am not a great soul, so I don't know how they work. But I must have done something wonderful in my last life. You know, to be so lucky to grow up here. Yet people sometimes thought it was strange that he didn't have a lot of time for people who were mad. If it was true madness, that's one thing. But if it was the kind of self-aggrandizing thing, he had no time for that at all. And yet there were a lot of people who were afraid to talk to him. They were nervous. You know, sitting here in the evenings, every evening, we would hear the conch. There was a blind man who walked round the hill every single night. Every night. And he blew the conch. I never heard that Bhagavan talked about, had time for religion. It's a funny thing. Or nationality. I mean, when you think about it, his devotees here, Palir Khan, Framji, Shroff, there were a lot of Parsis, Dr. Syed, and a few others, a lot of Muslims, Cohen, Jewish, a whole bunch of Christians. He never paid the slightest attention as to what your religion was. He didn't care, and he himself, I mean, he'd thrown away his Brahmin thread, and there was once a court case where, because I think it was something to do with the ashram ownership, I don't know all the details because, well, I didn't listen, basically. But he was declared by the court to be beyond
For ashrams, the 4 stages of life.
the 4 stages. And therefore he was not technically a Hindu. Nor did he care about nationality. People came from, even in those days, from every corner of the world. There was a Swedish woman who came once, and needless to say she was sent here because we were the people, my parents spoke all these languages and she could communicate, and this woman came. Then she went to the hall and sat there, and then she came. And it emerged during lunch that she had seen Bhagavan sitting there, and my mother said, no, that's a picture. She said, no, not a picture. I saw him sitting there. Well, she believed Bhagavan was sitting there. She didn't know that his body had gone off. And so she saw him there. And she didn't think it was strange because that's what she expected to see. But you know, everything that happened that people now say, oh my goodness, it was always so low key. There was always just an ordinary explanation. The man who wanted to, I told you about that, the man who wanted to cremate his wife and it was monsoon time. When he looked out of the window and said, it might be fine. Well, anybody could say that. That's not a gesture, you know. He never did anything in that manner. Like Sundar. Do you remember his voice? Slightly light. He didn't have a heavy, deep voice. He had a slightly light voice. But his voice was very like Bhagwan's voice. He spoke so many languages, I think. Malayalam and Indian languages. He spoke a number of them. The funny thing is, he didn't speak English. 2 or 3 words. That's it. Oh yeah, he could understand, but he didn't speak.
So when you would speak to him in English?
No, we all learned Tamil then. I spoke it much better then than I do now. Because unfortunately, I never learned to read and write. Anyway, we were lucky, we were blessed. The atmosphere was alive when I think back. And all centered around Bhagavan. Sometimes big. On Jayanti it was big. The business of going round the hill was then not a big deal. We would go round on full moon night for the simple reason that you could see where you were going. I mean, otherwise, if it's dark and people have been throwing things at the side of the road, my mother always made us go round barefoot. She said if you had shoes on, then the shoes would get the benefit of protection. But then later you couldn't go round barefoot anymore. I mean, in those days there was one car in town. I thought Car Street was called Car Street because that's where the one car was parked. I didn't realise it was called that because of the huge big Jagannath chariots. But I think there was a film actor who made a film of Bhagwan and the hill and going around the hill. And since that day, the crowd started. But we could go round peacefully, and we often went round the inner path, which is now forbidden. Well, in a way it's a pity not to go, but I suppose it's right because you don't want it littered and then tea shops. They're afraid of a whole, thing starting. Yeah. Oh, sure, a lot.
before going.
Always. Wherever we went, wherever anybody went, we went to take leave of Bhagavan. Either we would go and say, oh, we're going round the hill, and he'd, right? But to this day, if I'm going anywhere, I go and take leave of Bhagavan and say, I'm going to Madras or Pondi or Cody or wherever, but I go and tell him. Yeah. Well, you see, I never learnt to meditate. I can't do it. So I go to the old hall and I sit there and I chat. And I tell Bhagavan what's going on and what's happening. And well, I do it quietly, but I mean, he's there, he can hear. But I keep him up to date. As in saying, this is it. No, not in so many words. He taught me all about everything in another sense, because I knew what he meant and what he wanted and what he would approve of. But I suppose he did teach me a lot, but not in so many words. And he taught me one thing, that is, don't expect him to change things for you, because he won't do it. And tread softly. The fact that he is a jnani, the fact that he is a force of nature, huge power, and you don't mess around with that, and, you know. No, I showed him when I got a book, the Mother Goose book of, children's verses, and he looked at it and it was falling to pieces. So he gave it to be recovered, rebound, which it was, gave it back to me, and that should be one of my great treasures. I lost it. Just left it somewhere. But the thing about showing everything to him, I wish I'd brought it down to show you. Workmen, when they're doing the thatching, they found this little piece of metal. They didn't know what it was, so what do? Take it to Bhagavan. We've just found this in the roof, what is it? And he looked at it and he said, looks like a shoehorn. It's what Westerners wear. Give it to Osborne, he'll use it. So I've got it. I mean, it's my treasured possession. But it's a ratty little bent metal shoehorn. I'm having a hard time of this because I don't remember more and I can't make stories up. I can't do that about Bhagavan, I would honestly be scared to do that. They didn't have to, we knew that. No, we knew that we, like the animals, small children have that kind of instinct.
So when you went to first see him, right? Did they prep you or did they say you're going to see somebody? You
No.
just went.
Just went. What my mother said to me was, here, you hold this, and gave me the tray. Because I was the only one I was mobile, 3 years older than my brother. So he was 2, my sister was 1, and I was used to, no, I cannot remember ever anybody saying it in words. But we all lived it, we all knew that, we all behaved with the deepest respect. Even the small children. And as I said, even the animals. The children do have that sense.
Where would you sit when they were chanting the Vedas and chanting Upadeshasaram?
Well, they would come in through the door opposite the couch and go in the corner on the right. There's some space there. And they would all sit there, and Bhagavan loved it. He would listen to the singing and the chanting. And everybody also, of course, would listen. There were times, as I told you, when Bhagavan, I don't know where he was or where he went, but everybody was silent. And sometimes he went to this space when they were singing, I think. Then, of course, they weren't silent, but everybody else was. Yeah. He was a child. The ones Vishwanathan, he was one of my favourites. Dr. TNK, whom I loved. He was such a lovely man. Dr. TNK would pick me up from school, I came down from Kodaikanal on the school train, and I would spend the night with the family, and then the next day he would drive here. And it was a very orthodox Brahmin family. But because I was a small child, they ate in the kitchen and I was allowed to eat with them. I mean, they weren't going to put me outside on my own. So once they had 2 guests staying with them, an Englishman and a Dutchman. And they put a table outside the kitchen in the hall, 2 plates, 2 chairs, and we all sat down for lunch. And there was suddenly a hell of a row. And we rushed out to see what was going on. And I don't remember which one, but one of them said he was a Brahmin, either the Englishman or the Dutchman. And he said, I can't eat in front of you, or because you're a non-Brahmin. He said to the Dutchman. And we rushed out, and Dr. TNK was trying not to laugh. He got the giggles a lot. And I looked at him like, see, he eventually found another table and put one in another room or something. But there's the Englishman and the Dutchman. One of them was being orthodox. They're weird. After all, even Bhagavan was beyond Hindu. And as I said before, he didn't pay any attention to Orthodox religion or nationality. But I came back from abroad, I was 16, I'd been away, sat down for lunch, and my best friend was the gardener's daughter. And she was the same age as me, so, I felt so grown up, foreign returned. So she came and said to me, I want to talk to you. So I said, okay, talk. She said, no. After lunch, under the guava tree bush, that was our place. We used to tell our stories and whatever. So after lunch, I went there, and she crawled under the bush, and she said, I'm married. And I said, yes, and I hope you're very happy, and so on. She said, never mind all of that. When are you going to get married? And I said, well, in Nambajadi we don't get married young. And she said, I'm not talking about young. I'm talking about you. You're 16 and you're old. When are you going to get married? So I said, well, in our caste, sometimes we don't get married till we're really old, like 20 or something. She said, oh, are you? Why don't your parents find you a husband? So I said, in our caste, parents don't find you a husband. So who's going to find you a husband? I said, I was feeling sorry for myself at this point, you know. I said, I'm supposed to find my own husband. She said, what? You mean to say that your parents are going to let you walk up and down on the street looking for a husband and they won't help you? Oh, she said, I'll never understand you people. So I got married at 17.
Did you? That's peer pressure.
I wonder if she was, no, 18, no, not 17, 18. I wonder if she was responsible. I don't have one outstanding memory that I can think of. I just remember him as being part of our lives, part of it, you know, the most important part of our life, actually. I suppose. Only once. Once he looked at me when I was sitting there and I felt that. Phew. But that time I did. And I don't know, I must have been. I don't know how old I was. I was quite young, actually. At that time it was like, boom. But okay, I want to make it clear. I was so lucky to come here as a child, to be brought up with this. I didn't realise it at the time. You know, like with all children, it was natural. But there was this shining light who was the centre of our world. And that's my luck. But I have absolutely no pretensions to being any sort of advisor, spiritual advisor, guru. I'm not qualified, I don't do that. You know, if anybody wants spiritual advice, go to Bhagavan.